January 4th, 2024. It was nighttime. Two experienced divers, Christopher's Gate and Frederick. These two were going to dive in the Plate Tail Reservoir, Belgium. That too, in a lake below a huge hydroelectric dam. The problem was the four huge turbines of this dam, which used to draw water to generate electricity throughout the day. But the problem was that these turbines could start at any time without any warning. That is why the diving club had made safety zones here. Zone A and Zone B, where no one could go. These two divers, unaware of the danger, came out of the safety zone, where there was no security. At 5 in the evening, when everyone started returning home, Christopher and Frederick started preparing for their night diving. Look, they didn't come for a normal dive. Their intention was something else. Both got off at a depth of 40 meters with a fast underwater scooter, where nothing could be heard. The turbines were closed and it was dark all around. They wanted to experience something new. Because of that, now they were right in front of the dam intake tunnel. But then, there was a slight dip in the water, and both started feeling strange vibrations. Without warning, the dam became active, as if the dam was waiting for them. Suddenly, four reversible pump turbines started, and at a speed of 106 cubic meters per second, the turbines started pulling the water towards them. They didn't even get time to react. That strong force pulled both of them into the tunnel, where the turbines were present, and the huge rotating blades were waiting for them. Now, both of them were completely helpless. The underwater scooter also failed in front of that strong force. And then, both of them fell straight down from those blades, and their spines grew. They became moths. On Friday morning, the rescuers found some small parts of the body under the dam, and they found human remains up to a kilometer away. What can a delta force do? You might know from this incident. This is a real footage of the Lake Oliver Dam incident, which was recorded in GoPro. All the checklists were double-checked that day. All the valve switches and lots were also double-checked, so that the divers could safely enter the water. A diver named Alex enters the waterfall chamber that day, which was directly connected to the lake, and that door was lifted up with the help of a chain. On this day, the gate was closed, and Alex slowly started coming down with the help of the chain. Everything was being recorded on the camera, on the helmet. Everything was going on smoothly, but then he started feeling a pull on his body. An invisible force was pulling him towards itself. Alex was fully aware of this, that if a force pulls him near the dam, then it will take him with it. He was also aware of this, that his right hand started pulling him toward a hole, and then 850 pounds of pressure started pulling him. He started screaming loudly, "I'm stuck, I'm stuck." His one arm was on a 10-inch pipe, and his force was pulling him. Now it was nearly impossible to get out of it. The delta P pressure was such that it was like lifting a car with one hand. His lungs started shrinking. It was very difficult to breathe. All the workers standing up there started panicking. Everyone was shocked because everything was double-checked. But still, all the co-workers were eager to find out which invisible force was pulling Alex towards itself. They found out that there was another hidden pipe, which was not listed in the Lotto checklist, which was directly connected to the penstock tunnel. And the worst part was, it took nearly 30 minutes to close that valve, but there was no hope for Alex. Within minutes, he had lost consciousness, and he fainted. His body and chest were squeezed, which resulted in a very painful death. Anyway, this is nothing. The story I'm going to tell you next, I'll give you a warning beforehand. Maybe it will help you breathe. And I'm not just saying this. Your breath will really shake. So whoever passed the lungs test, they should move forward. The story I'm going to tell you, maybe you've seen it in some shorts, but there's a lack of detail in everything, and it's very difficult to explain those things in a short video. Now hold your breath. In a country called Trinidad and Tobago, there's something that the whole world is waiting to hear about. At 2:15 p.m., a company called LMCS Limited had taken up the task of repairing the Paria Fuel Trading Company's pipe. The fuel from this pipe was transported to the mainland through underground sea pipes. However, these pipes were not in operation yet, because maintenance work was still pending. On the same day, at 2:30 p.m., a team of 5 divers arrived for maintenance work. Their names were Kazim Ali, Yusuf Henry, Faisal Kawan, Rishi Nadsar, and Chris Boudram. It was a normal day for these divers. They had no idea what was going to happen to them. To access the pipe, a habitat bell was used. It was placed on top of the pipe so that all the water would come out and create space to work. One of the tasks was to remove an inflatable plug from the pipe. This plug kept the crude oil separate from the seawater. At 2:45 p.m., Kazim Ali arrived with a tool which his team members used to deflate the plug. But as soon as the valve opened, a powerful explosion happened. The water entered the habitat with a lot of pressure, like a toilet flush. It started spinning like a tornado inside the pipe. It would have been different if the water was alone. But the pressure was so high that all 5 divers and their tools were pulled inside the pipe. No one understood what was happening. Now all 5 of them were inside the small pipe, yearning to breathe, but they were lucky because in the pipe, where they stopped, there were air pockets to breathe in a small, narrow space. But the air that kept them alive was also the reason for this accident. Yes, differential pressure had pulled them inside. Everything calmed down and the pressure settled again. As soon as they went inside, they saw, well, they didn't see anything. They found themselves in the mud of the oil. Even inside, they felt like they were going to die. But fortunately, they were still alive. All of them. There was darkness everywhere, pitch black. And the worst thing was that they couldn't even open their eyes in that darkness. Because as soon as they opened their eyes, they started burning. It felt like they were boiling with fire because of that oil and gases. As soon as they started to understand something, they started calling each other by shouting and started assessing each other's condition. Their eyes were burning. Their ears were ringing. Their body was injured, and their lungs were yearning for air. As soon as they cleaned their nose and airways, they started breathing. That too from a small space. They were keeping their body up and their head down from the pipe so that they could breathe, but they were still breathing. Not a fresh breath, but a smelly breath of crude oil. See, they were alive, but they didn't know how long. Now they started inspecting each other and found out how far they were from the dead end of the pipe and how far they had reached, how far they had come. But it wasn't easy to find out because there was no torchlight. It was pitch black and no one knew where to go. Should they go this way or that way? Because if they went this way, it was a dead end. There was no opening. Now if they could go this way. But they didn't know where to go. That pipe was about 1,200 feet long, and no team member had an agreement on where to go. Everyone was guessing. When you have lunch break, what's this? Thank you, bye-bye. Then they decided to go in the same direction and move in Chris's direction. So Chris was first, then Kazim, then Yusuf, and finally Faisal. The pipe was in a bad condition. There was an oil slug stuck in the pipe, and it was difficult to move on a slippery surface. Some people were injured. Their eyes and ears were covered in oil, and all of this was in pitch black darkness. They couldn't see anything, but they were slowly moving forward. After an hour of hard work, another problem came up. The air pocket where they were able to breathe came to an end. The person in front, that is Chris, his head was only 6 inches away from the top of the pipe, and that space and air was getting less and less. Chris and Kazim decided that the rest of the team would stay behind, and they would go ahead and look for another air pocket from where they could breathe. They promised that if they survived, they would get help. They tried as much as they could, sticking their heads up and moving forward. But the path to breathe was so narrow that in between, oil was also going into their mouths, because of which they took a deep breath and dipped themselves in the oil and moved forward. They struggled, and while struggling to breathe, fortunately, they reached another air gap. But then they came across something. It was an oxygen tank. This is what they needed to get out of here. And that oxygen tank helped them reach the next air pocket. But both the oxygen tanks were running out, and Chris's oxygen tank was completely over. But now Kazim's injury was getting worse, and he was not able to move fast anymore. Kazim gives his remaining oxygen tank to Chris and says with a smile, If you survive, don't forget us. The mouth of the oxygen tank was broken, so Chris was forced to breathe through the broken pipe. Chris promised Cosm that if he survived, he would get help. As soon as he said this, Chris started moving forward, but the problems kept increasing because that oxygen tank was also going to be over, but he kept moving forward without any worries. That's when he came across something. It was an oxygen tank. One more oxygen tank. Chris was terrified. Chris moved that oxygen tank forward and started moving forward in a 2.5 feet pipe. Now this oxygen tank was also responding. He was barely able to breathe. As he moved forward, he reached near the riser pipe because now the road was not straight. It was going upwards. But then a terrible thought came to his mind. Is this the other end of the pipe? Because if this was the case, he would only get an inflatable plug ahead. The oxygen tank was also over there. He took a deep breath, and with the name of God, he came up with all his energy. And fortunately, it was the end of the pipe from where all of them had entered. He reached the top of the pipe and breathed a sigh of relief. But there was no one there. He shouted loudly and kept banging the pipe. After working hard for about 2 hours, at 4:45 p.m., after a lot of shouting and banging, Chris was finally taken out of the pipe. As soon as he came out, Chris told the team, there are small air pockets in the pipe, and 4 of his companions are still alive. They are injured, but they are alive. Please save them. After which Chris was taken to the hospital. Now Chris had a hope that his friends would be saved. By this point, the other crew of LMCS was not even sure that anyone could be alive. But when Chris came back alive, a hope was awakened, after which a team of divers was formed, and they entered the sea. They banged the pipe, but there was no response. Then they started banging the pipe at different places, but still there was no response. That's when they got a response back, which means they were still alive. The divers who were trapped inside the pipe, they must have been relieved to hear the sound of tapping, that people are trying to get them out. They knew that professional divers and equipment must have come to save them, and there must have been an evacuation plan on the ship. Oxygen tank, rocks, lights. Something must have come, but time passed, and no one came, and the hope inside them started breaking. Injury, breathing issues, and oily air. They kept struggling. They kept screaming, but still no one came. With every passing hour, the concentration of carbon dioxide was increasing, but they couldn't do anything but wait. Now think, you cover yourself with a blanket on your bed, and there is darkness everywhere. You are breathing. That breath is turning into carbon dioxide, and you are suffocating, again and again. But removing that blanket from your face is in your hands. But they had nothing. They could only bear it. They could struggle with it. They could suffer. They could yearn for that fresh breath, which they might not have gotten. How bad it must have felt. A few hundred feet away was their life, but no one came to save them. They kept tapping the pipe, pain, exhaustion, and they kept knocking themselves. But finally they realized, no one is coming. The sounds of knocking and screaming were slowly fading away and becoming quiet. The company said there was no safe rescue plan. That's why they didn't allow other divers to go inside, because the delta pressure could rise again. Although many divers were ready to take risks even after bringing professional equipment so that their friends would survive, but the management didn't allow them. A few things were clear. After Chris was rescued, everyone was alive till 5 p.m. on Friday. For the next 48 hours, people heard the sound of knocking from inside the pipe. They were knocking the pipe, and the autopsy showed some people were alive till Saturday, and some people were alive till Monday. Either they died due to their injuries, or oxygen ran out in the air, or maybe they died of exhaustion while trying to find the exit. Nobody was making an attempt to rescue him. After this incident, no company supported the diver's family. No compensation was given, and justice was far away. No one was found liable, and no one was charged with a criminal case, only due to the political gain. In April 2025, the government approved a payment of Rs. 125,000,000 per person to the 4 divers' families and Chris. And the scariest thing to me was, if Chris hadn't come out alive, then these companies would have buried him there, and no one would have heard about this manslaughter. No one would have known that inside a pipe, alive people were breathing their last and were buried alive there. Every second trapped inside that pipe must have felt like a day. I can't even imagine. They waited for help with every breath, but they never came. It must have been such a horrific scene with those poor people. How did death even come? You can imagine how they must have breathed their last. Some must have fallen asleep again and again, and then come back to life. Maybe some people killed themselves on purpose, and some people, waiting for help for many days, they must have held their heads from the pipe so that they could breathe their last. But after losing their breath, they must have fallen down as well, and buried alive in that crude oil. Imagine a narrow space of 30 inches, in a pipe filled with oil, waiting with every breath, every second, feeling the pain of death, not hearing a sound, and not seeing any hope in that darkness, staying alive and waiting for death. Which of the two is more painful? Maybe those divers gave us the answer. In their last breath,